Time for a break. Welcome back to the class, everyone. As of recently, we've been talking a lot about the new raid. And in today's video, we're going to do something a little bit anti-raid. And by that, what I mean is the way that they're currently structured is they change every 7 to 9 months. And while this can add to a little bit of the fun of not just constantly doing the same monotonous thing over and over again, it does present an interesting challenge for roster building because some of the characters don't exactly work well in other game modes, and quite frankly, haven't worked well in other game modes. So what I want to talk about today is 5 teams that have really stood the test of time and should continue to do so in the future. So that really being the aim of the video, looking for which teams out there have had a really long shelf life and aren't really dependent on one specific game mode for a limited amount of time to be useful. And we're going to be starting things off with General Skywalker himself. Now, to really grasp just how good this team has been over the years, you have to understand how important it was when it first came out. When General Skywalker was first released, it was immediately the #1 team in Squad Arena, which is where all of our crystals used to be. It's not as relevant now, but at the time it was very important. Even from a PvE perspective, the team shined a ton in light side Geonosis territory battles. Not only because they were the best light side team at the time, but because General Skywalker himself was called up by name, as well as the 501st called out by their faction in some specific missions, meaning that you really had to have them even if you had other good light side teams on top of it. Now, while neither of those game modes are really relevant nowadays, it is still aged well because its overall viability has pivoted a little. Now, they do have a variety of tags here, being Jedi, Galactic Republic, and 501st, or at least General Skywalker himself does, meaning that from a PvP perspective, he almost consistently has a good datacron, which is really nice because it allows him to punch up and beat some of the more difficult teams out there. Right now, one of the best defensive teams is Queen Amidala with Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan's datacron, and Gas is actually one of the most consistent counters to that just because of how much damage he builds every single time the enemies gain a buff, of which Queen Amidala does a ton because that's kind of her whole kit with the healing over time. Now, on top of that, they're also a pretty good team in Conquest, especially for those people who don't just have like 6, 7, or 8 Galactic Legends, where you're really relying on a team that might not 3-star everything, but they should at least beat it. Coupled with the fact that if you have one of those attack at a turn protection recovery data discs, it's actually a really hard team for the AI to beat because every single time they attack General Skywalker, he's going to heal, and they can't really consistently daze him because they keep creating him on top of that. Also, the required for Rex, and just there's a lot of stuff that this team overall does. And in fact, we might even see more requirements come out of this with Ahsoka Galactic Legend being announced. I would be shocked, and maybe it's not this Rex, but I would be shocked if we somehow got through all of her Rex and there wasn't one Rex required for anything. I even think 5s is on the table, but we already kind of talked about that in length. The next team I want to talk about that has had a lot of longevity, and ever since it came out, it was very good, and it really hasn't stopped being good, is going to be Darth Revan. Darth Revan, similar to General Skywalker when he first came out, was the meta and also the best dark side team, automatically making him very important for that territory battles that really came out almost right when he did. But on top of that, it's aged well in the sense that, number one, yeah, they've had reinforcements from Malgus to make the ground team better, but more importantly, it's the ship meta. It's been the ship meta for about a year now, and after the last road ahead, it doesn't really seem to be going anywhere. So both from a ground and a fleet PvP perspective, it's always done really well. PvE, it kind of has fallen off just a little bit, but I guess one of the nice things is I guess this is kind of not really nice, but you're required to Relic 9 a lot of your Sith for a variety of reasons, or at least high Relic them, these two to be in Relic 9. So you end up using them in Rote a lot at the higher phases just because you purely don't have anything else at that high of relics. Next up is going to be CLS. And I know I've beaten this horse to death. I've done it 1,000 times. I think I've made 600 videos, and 300 of them I probably talked about CLS. But it's you just can't. They have stood the test of time. They've been relevant in not every game mode because they don't really have. Oh, I guess they do have ships. They actually are relevant as well in the ship meta. So I guess I can add that to the long list here. But I remember, and I'm dating myself here, I remember when I was using Commander Luke Skywalker and Han Solo to duo the entire Rancor raid. and that was really just where things started. They're also really important for the assault battle, where only rebels can be used. I realize you can probably now use Leia, but for most people, you're probably getting CLS before, especially considering he is a wreck on top of that. In fact, everyone in this team is a wreck, sometimes for multiple different Galactic Legends or just multiple characters. So there's a lot going on here. They're also very nice in Conquest. I quite like them because they're what I call a reactive squad, and what I mean by that is you don't need them to have blistering 500 speed to compete with the other teams in Conquest. You just need to make sure that they have 50% counter chance so they can whittle the enemy team down purely by taking damage and then hitting them back and going from there. So overall, CLS, amazing team when it came out. It did get reinforcements as it went along, but really, I mean, Nubak, he's not that new anymore. That name's probably was never appropriate because I know everyone likes Chupio, or at least you remind me in the comments. But at any rate, this team has kind of been at this stage for as long as it has been, and it's been pretty decent in PvP on top of everything else as well, especially when we get those nice datacrons. Next up is going to be General Grievous, and he's going to kind of share the theme of the first two teams in the sense that it was a very important TB team when it first came out, not only because it was good, but because it was required for specific missions that really wouldn't let you use anything else. Now, on top of that, they had a lot of PvP defensive viability when they first came out. We had a certain rush a while ago where just like 3 or 4 teams came out that all beat it really well. One of which being Wampa, who was a very cheap counter. But even then, transitioning this team to offense, I've used it several times, not recently because nobody's doing it anymore, but when Starkiller originally transitioned to defense, General Grievous really had his number, and we don't even need to use Newt anymore. You can, take him off and throw in Stop or Droideka depending on what PvP game mode you're in. You'll need the right Omicron to match the game mode in that sense, but at any rate, the core of the team is still pretty much there. I liked Newt because he did a lot of things that Stop is doing now, but he's also important in some other areas. On top of that, they are also just really nice in Conquest for the same reason that we mentioned before with CLS, where they are a reactive squad. And but what I mean by that is B2 has this ability called Reactive Protocol, where he will gain turn meter, he will decrease his cooldowns, and then he will give turn meter to the rest of his team when he applies those debuffs. So overall, just always has been good and has continued to be good and will probably continue to do so afterwards. Now, next up, we have Inquisitors. Now, Inquisitors are not that old of a team, so I debated putting them on here, but gosh, they were really good when they came out, and well, at least ever since Grand Inquisitor came out, and they've just not stopped in any way, and the amount of places they're good in is ridiculous. In fact, I'm not sure if I can think of a single game mode that they're bad at. I guess the raid, just because they're not allowed, but pretty much every other thing out there, they have a lot of stock in. TB, just overall amazing, because they have specific missions, not only to, earn Reva herself, but even after that, you can get, not unlimited, but you can get every single time that you go through it. Ship meta, they're also very important in that regard. Both the Scythe as well as the Interceptor are really what make Empire as relevant as they are right now, at least when it comes to ships. And then on top of that, Conquest, they really have the two main things that are important from whatever disc build you're trying to build. Two of the disc builds that are most common are Amplify Agony using debuffs, of which they have a plethora. And then on the other end of things, Zealous Ambition, they have 2 support characters, one of which is, or I guess healer, one of which is constantly attacking out of turn and dealing damage. So really, whatever build you go with or the mix of the two, you're going to have a pretty good time. Not to mention that CG loves to put Purge inside of Conquest all the time. And then on top of that, and this is very similar to General Skywalker that we looked at before, the entire team has 3 factions: Empire, Inquisitorius, and Online Force User. And what has happened over the last 2 years that they've been in the game, it almost feels like they consistently have a Datacron. In one of those factions, they might not have like the busted level 9 with Reva like we have right now, but they'll have something with Empire, they'll have something with Inquisitorius, they'll have something with Unaligned Force User that starts to cut out a lot of the cheaper counters like Phoenix that would typically, without a Datacron, just be able to smash up the Inquisitors overall. So I realize it's only been 2 years since they've really been out as a team at all, but at the same time, they were very important when they first came out, and a lot of the things that made them important when they first came out are still very relevant and will probably continue to do so. I don't see the Empire fleet. I mean, I guess I could get a different reinforcement that would make those obsolete, but it's probably highly unlikely. Now, we do have some honorable mentions. I did want to talk about these 4 specific teams here, but the reason why they didn't make the cut as, the top 5 is because the teams saw, particularly Hera and Qui-Gon, and I guess Finn too, Mother Talzin not so much, but they saw a significant gap where the team was good, the team was bad for like 3 or 4 years, and the team was good again. Like, the timeline between when Crex came out and when Phoenix was like a bad team, it's huge. Like, it was for a very long time. Qui-Gon Jinn, his Zeta came out, he was good. GK came out, was tossed to the side, and then we dug him up again when the Omicron came out later. Finn, Zori, and then Mother Talzin because of Marin coming back. Now, another honorable mention that I wanted to talk about is Emperor Palpatine and Jedi Revan. These teams really have stood the test of time. The reason why I didn't want to include them was purely because their teams have changed a ton ever since they came out. And that's not really meant as a knock on them, but it does mean that you constantly have to refresh what characters are there. And in like Jedi Revan's case specifically, there's a lot of legendaries that have gone in and out of his team to keep him relevant. And I realize we've kind of done that in some other areas where we've added Malgus here, we've added Stop here, we've added Reva here. But at the same time, you know, 4 of the characters staying the same is probably pretty good. Whereas Emperor Palpatine, like, he started off being an entirely Sith team, and now there's not a single other Sith on his team, at least the one that most people are using was Starkiller, because you can't because Starkiller is unique. But anyways, I figured we mentioned them because they have kind of stood the test of time, just not in as much of a traditional sense as the rest of these. So let me know in the comments what team that you farmed up several years ago that has just continued to pay dividends and had a really good return on investment. But until the next time, thanks for watching and stay awesome.